Well, welcome everybody. I'm Rick Joyner. I'm here with Brad Cummings from California. You're sequestered, quarantined.
Yeah, we live in gruesome Newsom country.
Yeah, and they've tied you down for a long time, but Brad is, I don't know how long I've known you, over 20 years, 30 years maybe, but you were originally a vineyard pastor, and
Yep.
when I met you, and done a lot of things. You've gotten into writing, producing. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit today is the Founder's Bible that you and David Barton did, one of my favorite all-time resources. I'm reading it for my fourth time now.
Good man.
Yeah, truly addicting, though. We got to warn people about how addicted you can get to that Bible.
Only could we get the rest of the country addicted to it. That would be helpful.
It would turn everything around for sure. But also, the other night we were talking about some of your insights, the incredible experience you had of that triple Corona.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and just start telling us? I thought this was an amazing insight here.
Yeah, what was fascinating is like every New Year's Eve, we go up to the mountains, and for the last 6-7 years, I usually have some wonderful dreams and an encounter with the Lord. And so it's kind of like, I really look forward to it. It's like, it's the way I sort of bring in the new year. It's like we're up in the mountains and I'm looking to have a wonderful time with the Lord. And this year, nothing happened. I just got deathly sick. And I was incredibly bummed. But I was like the sickest I've ever been for 3 weeks.
It wasn't
and there was almost 3 days that I didn't get out of bed at all. And my wife was really concerned because I don't think I've been sick in ages. And what ultimately happened is my whole nasal passages got clogged. And I got to a point where I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep. And my blood pressure was going up. It's like I was trying to use decongestants, and those don't work well with each other. And so finally she kind of said, hey, I know you never do this, but could we go to the doctor? And he took a CAT scan. I had a sinus headache that lasted for 2 solid weeks. And I was getting a little scared, like, the only thing that lasts that long might be a brain tumor. And so when he said, let's do a CAT scan, I'm going like, I was bracing for the worst. And he came back and I said, so what is it? He said, well, there's, good news is there is no tumor, but he said, you have 100% blockage. And
brain blockage?
Yeah, brain blockage. I have not had oxygen in my brain for years.
Wow. We were kind of suspecting that. I'm good.
Yeah, it's proved true.
Yeah.
So I ended up having to go in for nasal surgery. My bones were all messed up. They weren't the way they were supposed to, and that was really painful. But what I realized is as we were moving into this season where all of a sudden the coronavirus was going on, I recognized I had all the comorbidities. I little plump, and so I was overweight, a little pre-diabetic, high blood pressure, and a history of family heart disease. So I'm going like, oh, well, this is not good for me. And I'm sitting there going like, what's going on? And we had the whole, prophetic roundtable, and that was such a rich, wonderful time. But I sort of recognized, on the big scale of things, God had not said an awful lot to much of any of us about what was going on. And so I kind of came out of that time going like, Lord, what is going on? And it's like, we were talking back and forth, and I was wondering, it's like, is this man-made? Is this a bioweapon from a Wuhan lab? And just all those things where it's like chasing down those trails, trying to figure it out. And then somewhere in all of this, I happened upon a guy who had basically predicted that there would be the release of a coronavirus somewhere. He did this in 2019, that there'd be a release of a coronavirus most likely in Wuhan or somewhere within the Hubei province. And I'm starting to go like, well, how did he know? And he's a triple board certified MD, endocrinology, immunology, and he's had 17 years of postgraduate medical school study and even hospice care. Incredibly brilliant, probably the most amazing guy I've listened to in a long, long time. His name's Zach Bush, but he's not a traditional doctor. And he started to talk about what actually happens with the coronavirus. And the reason he said that there would be the release of a coronavirus in that area is because of all of the earth where they sort of track the spraying of glyphosate and toxins and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Wuhan was the most toxic environment in all the earth. It's the most polluted city. And they had dumped the most toxic chemicals into the soils. And what he said is it's nature's response to sort of respond to the toxicity of the environment. And this guy is so educated in the world of viruses. And, I didn't know this when we began, but he said there's 10 to the 31 viruses in the world. And it's in our air, it's in our water, it's in our soils. So it is sort of the soup in which we live.
You're talking about 10 to the 31st power.
Yeah, we're just like that. That's an absurd number. Yeah. It's like 50% of our makeup as human beings is viruses.
Wow.
And what that is, it's just a small little strand of RNA, and it's genetic material, and it's like. You start to realize just how fearfully, wonderfully made we are, and how fearfully, wonderfully made the planet is that we live on. And so I just got fascinated, and he started talking about the virus in a way that no one else did. He said, I don't know that this is our enemy the way we think of it, because it's not like it's living. It needs a host in order for it to do something. He said it really is like a genetic update to a stressed system that we need to adapt. It's kind of like raising a flag that says, hey, this is such a toxic environment. We need to adapt. And as he was looking at all of the science that was unfolding, he said, I think we're misdiagnosing and mistreating a lot of the patients, because they're not dying because of a respiratory disease, which is what everyone was sort of the standard protocol. It's like put everyone on a ventilator if they have this, and then 88% of all the people that go on ventilators die. And so it's like, as nice as it is to think that, why are we thinking they need to be put on a ventilator? Well, because they're expressing their response to the disease as I can't breathe. Mm-hmm. And when he said that, all of a sudden, ding, 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 I went, wait a minute. That's what I went through in January. What's he really talking about? And so I just got completely interested in a deep dive with this guy. I listened to maybe 20 of his different lectures. And as he unpacked it all, he talked about what happens with the COVID virus. And what it does is it joins itself to pollution in the air. PM 2.5 micron particles that are sort of our pollution, and that it comes into our system, and nobody really dies of the virus. What happens is the virus, what's joined to it, it actually disengages our blood's capacity to carry oxygen. And so when you put someone on a ventilator, you think they need oxygen, so you're blowing more in. But the problem is that they can't absorb it. And so the virus, in a healthy person, the virus doesn't really find a way in. But in an unhealthy person, the virus comes in, and because of what it does to our blood, because of a weakened immune system and our incapacity, it's like it takes advantage of things that are wrong. And then because the way it bonds as molecules, oxygen cannot bond to our blood. Therefore, it's not taken to the parts of our body that need it. And that's why there's an accelerated distress of a response, so that whatever comorbidity you had, all of a sudden it's not getting the normal nutrients and oxygen that it needs. And so your body goes into an accelerated response, a riot of sorts. And that's where they have the problems. And so people are thinking they're trying to treat it for a respiratory disease, but they're dying from their underlying conditions. And if they would be treating the underlying conditions, they might get ahead of the curve. But he said the real problem is, like in our pollution stuff, this virus acts an awful lot like cyanide poisoning. And what that does is that messes with our body's capacity to absorb oxygen. And they have FDA-approved protocols for how to address that with 3 different quick injections that immediately dissipate the situation.
Wow.
But that's not the way they're treating any of this. What's fascinating is hydroxychloroquine is one of the few substances that actually is similar to the cyanide protocol, where it changes the shape of blood molecules and allows it to rebond to oxygen. That's just sort of like the short summary of what hydroxychloroquine. So while this guy's not a Bush supporter, not a Trump supporter, and he's not wanting to get into all the arguments and stuff, he is saying, you know what? They're absolutely right in terms of the science behind this, and he's kind of fit to be tied as to why they're not paying attention to this.
It seems to be why the spectacular testimonies of people who are put on hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard this from 3 or 4 different doctor sources where you're going they actually do know the science, and they're actually not just theoretical medical professionals. They're working with patients. And one of the first guys talked about, he said, we can't keep treating people like some industrialized process that, this is what they have, just put them on a ventilator. If we don't treat them as individuals and figure out what is actually going wrong in that patient, we're not going to get ahead of the curve on what's going on here. And that to me was just fascinating, because it's like God doesn't ever industrialize anything in his kingdom. Each one of us is profoundly unique and important. And he doesn't have sweeping broad principles just to apply. It's like the shepherd's always dealing with the individual sheep and taking care of them. But that isn't how we do, mass marketing of religion. And so I'm looking at this, and it's fascinating in me. And so just the phrase, the patient is saying, I can't breathe. And the problem is our blood isn't delivering the life to where the body needs. And I then just started, that just stuck with me. And it's like, Lord, why is this sticking out? And then you come to the George Floyd case, where someone's standing on his neck, and that looks like an absolute murder. And you're just going people are starting to riot in response. And what are they chanting as they're walking through the streets?
What he was
They're all
saying,
chanting, I can't breathe.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me. I'm just like, wait a minute. In individuals in this time of coronavirus, it's the virus comes in, and when you're healthy, it does nothing to you. It's like it's a quick genetic update, and it's not going to be harmful to you. It's not your enemy. It's just sort of like when your computer gets hacked. The problem is if your software isn't up to date with all of the fixes that they do to it, people can find a way in. That's profoundly similar as an analogy of what happens with the coronavirus. If your body is not up in kind of the shape that it's meant to be, and Nathan from your guys' Morningstar University, just all the things that we would do to make ourselves normally healthy, that's probably the best thing that anybody could do in response to the coronavirus. Just the whole bit of, the whole world's washing their hands.
Right.
And I'm thinking, if we would wash our hands, God would clean our hearts. I mean, just simple little dynamics of going, if we would live right, just learning to rest. When we're completely out of balance, and I'm a total workaholic, and I felt like the Lord just kind of said, hey, stop. When are you going to actually pay attention to me and follow the rhythms of life and health? And I'm thinking, I'm so important, I got to just not sleep. And you're just going my body never gets to a place of reset. And I think the Lord just kind of said, would you listen to your wife? It's like, oh, okay.
Oh, no, it's come to that.
Oh, it's come to that, yeah. And she's been on my case about eating healthy foods and all this stuff. And so I'm just going okay, wow. and you said it a while back, it's like this is Psalm 23, where he makes us to lie down. And I just sort of felt like, wow, God, you're setting all my life aside. And regardless of whether I think it's important or not, I physically can't do it right now. And he just began to quiet me down and speak to me. And as I watched all this stuff unfold, I began to learn more just about the nature and the environment around us. And you and I have talked about the whole, green movement and some of the extremes with that. What's also interesting is as I learned more about this guy is not only is a triple board certified, doctor and kind of scientist, has his own independent lab, but he's working with the soils in the earth and trying to get us back to regenerative soils and, frankly, healthy food. We put 5.5 billion pounds of toxic chemicals, herbicides, insecticides, pesticides into our soils. And frankly, because of over-farming and over-tilling, we're killing our soils. And he then starts to talk about our soils as if we're losing our breathable soils. And I'm going like, wait a minute, just stop here. Our soils are saying I can't breathe? And then he starts talking about the oceans and the whole delicate system by which the earth kind of works and rain on us. And it's like our oceans are getting so toxic and acidified that they're saying, I can't breathe. And then he's talking about the rivers. And I'm going like, no, wait a minute. An individual person that's dealing with the disease is feeling its primary symptom. I can't breathe. We have people rioting in response to the injustices that they're seeing, and there's clearly something wrong, but they don't know what to do. But what they're chanting through our streets is, I can't breathe. And it's not everywhere, but it is in the pockets where there is existing pains and weaknesses. And then on our planet, we have, because of the overuse of one primary thing, glyphosate, and it's kind of messed with our gluten, it's now in our air, it's in our water, it's in our food. We're eating processed foods that are not living because it's like all this dead stuff. And I'm going like, gosh, Lord, this really feels like this whole thing is not just, it's like we need to take a pause and kind of consider our ways. How are we living? How are we responding? And as opposed to just attacking it like it's an enemy, I've sat here going like, I've never been able to sit there and just like take a war posture against this. I've sat there going like, well, if God allowed this to happen, whether it's man-made in a lab, whether it was designed as a weapon, Zach said, if it was that, then we have nothing to fear because they're not very good at it. It's not as dangerous to us. It doesn't. The death rate. They started at 30%. Then they had to drop it down to 3%. Now it's 0.3%. And so you're just going like, the modeling seems to me to be an awful lot like the climate modeling for the people that are screaming about the environment, where you're just going like, look, there's something wrong, but it's not as freak out as the models make it, with the sense of, imminent death. And I kind of sat back and it's like, well, Lord, what do we do? And I thought, one of the things I'm realizing in our big culture system is we've become so dependent on these massive supply chains that when all of a sudden a little area of it gets broken down, now all of us are in danger because we've become so dependent on just a couple of fine-tuned arteries in the name of super efficiency and profitability that all of a sudden we couldn't get toilet paper anywhere. People are experiencing meat shortages because of a couple of processing plants are shut down. And I'm looking at this going like, why are we so dependent on just a couple of places? And we've stopped doing things in regions. We've stopped doing things in localities. And then forgive me on this, but I started looking at the church going like, all of our mega churches, as awesome as they might be, they're not actually producing the most functional disciples. They're wonderful meetings, perhaps great teaching, wonderful times of worship. but there's not a lot of people who are operating in their gifts with a known sense of their purpose. You guys at Morningstar are one of the few places that I've seen that are really equipping the body to actually act like a body and function. And I started just going, well, we have massive supply chains in our church structures. And we don't, it's like, we're being prevented from meeting. And you're going like, I as editors of the Founders Bible, I'm going like, that's wrong. They don't have a right to do that. It's not constitutional. I'm gonna fight against that. Mm-hmm. And I've really sort of felt like I want to stand up against that, because I do think that's an encroachment that's wrong. It's on a faulty foundation. But at the same time, I've sort of felt like, hold on, perhaps God's doing something here. And we are allowed to meet in smaller groups. And I'm going like, that's actually far more functional ways to produce functional disciples that really learn and apply truth in their life. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not against the other stuff, but I began to look at all this going like, Lord, what are you doing here? You're trying to get us healthy in our physical bodies, because they are your temple and you need us. And if I'm not healthy, if I'm diseased, I'm not going to be all that helpful to him. Our culture right now has some real historic issues that do need to be resolved. And we've done much like grabbing a weed and ripping it off by the head, never getting to the roots and really resolving what is the problem down there. So when you just rip off the head, the weed responds with this ferocious growth that almost comes back even stronger. And this really ties into your whole sense of the second American Revolution and / Civil War, that because of things that we haven't completed in the past, that we didn't win, we didn't solve. It's almost like destined for us to repeat some of these things, mm-hmm. so that to finally get at the core of what's wrong. And then I'm looking at our just the way we do stuff. Right now, small businesses are just decimated all over the country, and all of the wealth transfer is going to the hands of just a few big monolithic companies. Mm-hmm. And you're going like, wait a minute, this is like the biggest hidden transfer of wealth that's ever happened in our generation, and it's not really fair or equitable. It seems to be taking advantage of the situations, and so. For me, I started just going, like, there's an awful lot to unpack here that is causing me to go like, I don't want to miss this moment. I want to be very aware of what you're doing. And, you mentioned the whole Corona thing. March 5th was really bizarre, because all of a sudden right above our house, and it's like our city, mm-hmm. we had a Lunar Corona, which is it's kind of like when the moon gets a ring around it, and it kind of looks like a big eyeball. What's really weird is it wasn't a double corona; it was actually a triple corona. A single corona is kind of unique, but they happen a fair amount. Double coronas are really rare. Triple coronas I couldn't find, but it so changed the atmosphere. And I went outside because I was wondering what's going on, and I just stared up at it. And as goofy as this is, I felt like it was God kind of looking down, and a real kind of, he used nature to kind of look like, consider your ways. Uh-huh. I'm looking at you. And then he took me to this whole Luke 19. And I knew I was supposed to go look at Luke 19. And so, I don't know that we have time to talk about all of it.
Go ahead and share that. I want to go back to a couple of points in just a minute, but...
Yeah, I'm sorry. I haven't really let you jump in much.
No, that was good.
Here's, in Luke 19, Jesus is passing by, and the first stop he stops is at Zacchaeus' house. Notorious sinner land. Mm-hmm. And Zacchaeus, he's doing everything he can to search out who is this guy. Jesus spots him, and then Zacchaeus is being noticed by the king, and he welcomes Jesus into his house. Hmm. And everyone's going like, you're going to his house? I think you'd like to lynch him. I mean, it's like, really? He's the guy that steals from us. And it's like Jesus is saying, I've come to seek and save the lost. And then the next thing he talks about is the whole parable of the kingdom in terms of money usage. And I just sort of felt like God was addressing us on issues of stewardship. What have you done with what I've given you? Because I am wanting to take an account. And what was so amazing is, it's like one guy, they each get 10, one guy makes 10, another guy makes 5, and the other guy buries his because he's so afraid. Mm-hmm. And our image of who God is what either frees us or releases us to be fruitful and functional. If I'm so afraid of making a mistake, I won't do anything. If I recognize God is behind me, encouraging me into this stuff, he wants me to be about his business. And he wants me to be fruitful. And to do that, I've got to be a proper steward of what he's given to me. And then what they go on to is that whole bit of, so I felt like it was a time of scrutiny where he said, by your own words will I judge you. And I'm sitting there going like, gosh, I've not been a good steward of my health. I've not been a good steward of my time. I'm not finding a way to sort of be refreshed and to be recreated. I don't let my body get into a place of getting reset. And I need to take care of that. And it's like, why am I so anxious? Why do I have to work so hard? Because I'm taking too much of the load on me. I'm not really recognizing just how much of the grace and the supernatural power he can release for the few things he's asked me to do, not the many things I get involved in. And then he talked about the whole bit of, he's looking at Jerusalem, and we could miss our day of visitation. It's like he's standing at the city, and it's like he kind of weeps over the city where, because you did not know the things that make for peace. And I'm looking at all the racial tension stuff. And I'm looking at the polarization of our culture and how it's like, it really seems as if there is a demonic agenda to divide us on every possible thing they could. And, whether you wear a mask, don't wear a mask, just all the different stuff, I'm just going like, if we really knew what would make for peace, we will not miss what's going on. But if we do not discern what we need for peace, I don't know. I don't think the outcome's guaranteed. And I'm kind of sobered by that. And then the last part of Luke 19 ends with the whole cleansing of the temple. And it's the one time that Jesus really loses it with a sense of vengeance, and he drives out the money changers. And I got to tell you, I got my own personal long history journey of the business of religion and how it can go south. And I just think we have made merchandise of the flock in a way that God's not pleased with. And we really have to look at what are we doing? How is the world seeing and recognizing how we're advancing his kingdom? And I just sort of felt like, wow, God, there's a lot there. And that's just skimming on it. But I really felt like Luke 19 was a big deal. Mm-hmm. It's not why it's called COVID-19. It's COVID-19 because it's coronavirus and it's 2019.
Yeah.
Well,
that's really
that's some of the stuff I've heard.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating, and there's something that you're touching on that I think we need to dig down on. And but this I can't breathe about the blood not able to carry, the coronavirus preventing the blood from carrying the resources it needs to where they're needed. And, basically in our nation, our circulatory system is our economic system. That's what carries what is needed to where it's needed. And that's being shut down. Of course, our economy has been devastated by this. Also, did that doctor say anything about the plastic pollution in the environment?
Yeah. I remember you and I talked about, you had a couple of moments where you really saw the anger of the Lord.
Yeah.
And one was in towards of individual we know, right. And the other was towards all the plastics in the ocean.
Well, it's in the pollution in the world, not just the ocean.
Well, I was so impacted by that because you and I had talked about your whole year of living dangerously and just going into the whole exploration. What's true here? What's exaggerated? And it's like when all of a sudden I'm looking at this I can't breathe stuff and I'm recognizing the planet in which we live on is a living organism of God's creation. It has its own sense of a circulatory system and arteries and there is such an amazing, there's an electromagnetic field around the earth that if it wasn't there, we would be fried by the sun. And it's like we actually, because of the sheer magnitude of the pollutants that we're loosing into the earth, we are actually messing. It's like pouring sand in a Lamborghini. It's like, you know what? Not good. It is. It's not going to affect everything that looks pretty, but the working parts are all of a sudden going to get gummed up in a way that's really tragic. And if we don't consider our ways, we are going to have problems downstream. What Zach, when he started to look about that, his real reason was in 1960, our children, maybe 1.2% of our children, had chronic diseases of any significance. Today, 54.2% of our children have chronic diseases. What has happened? What is, and it has everything to do with all of a sudden the autoimmune diseases, ADHD, attention deficit stuff. That's in kids and the thyroid issues, because in 1992, 1996, we started using spraying of this glyphosate stuff all over our food, not just to stop weeds, but then in the harvesting process to sort of dry it all quicker. And it's like, it's just in everything that we do, and it's having a horrible response in our bodies. And sort of even the way it seeps into the water system, the last 90 miles of the Mississippi River are referred to as Cancer Alley. And they have an absolute epidemic release of cancer. And it's because of what's flowing downstream, and it's in our air, it's in our water, it's in our food, and just going like, we can't get away from it. And we don't know, we really haven't done all the work to examine this. But like autism is directly tracked to these years where it, used to be 1 in 5,000. It then, I was utterly shocked by just the increase of disease and its progression. It was in the 60s, 1 in 5,000. In 2012, it was 1 in 88.
Wow.
In 2015, it was 1 in 46. In 2016, it's 1 in 36. And we're on a trajectory that by the year 2035, it'll be 1 in 3.
Good night.
And you're going like, I'm sorry, you have a society that cannot function if 1 in 3 people are basically suffering from a disease where they're not very functional within society. Yeah. And I'm sitting there going like, okay, why is that the case? And then he went into what glyphosate actually does, and this is what I found so fascinating.
Now explain glyphosate. Is that a basis of plastic?
Well, it's an herbicide. It's a chemical that they use the primary ingredient in Roundup to kill weeds.
Right. Okay.
The same company that made Agent Orange for Vietnam makes glyphosate. Not effective at killing weeds. Not good if it's in contact with us. Monsanto is the big producer, and they're losing billions and billions of dollars of lawsuits because they've directly connected this to the disease stuff that's going on. But at the cellular level, we really are like, there's a thing called mitochondria, which is basically in your cells, there's over 70 trillion light molecules. So when we think of who and what we are, we see this little, skin-covered flesh thing. We really are 70 trillion cells of light energy, and at the subatomic level in our cells, And glyphosate would be like a hot knife going through a fiber optic cable. It breaks off at the cellular level our capacity to communicate. And you think of in the garden, Adam and Eve, and they're in a state of, innocent perfection, and then sin basically stops and makes it lights out. It's like I've heard folks talk about how they were probably looked like they were clothed in light and then plunged into darkness. This is what that chemical does in destroying at the cellular level our cells' capacity to communicate, which is why, that's a central
and that
problem.
Communication is, what do I need? Blood, send me this. Blood, and that communication goes throughout our body to our brain, but also to our heart.
Yes. And it's like we have an epidemic rising emergency of chronic diseases all over the place. My daughter's dealing with an autoimmune disease. We got family members that are dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's. All of these things have exponentially spiked since the increase of use of toxins into our environment. And, I'm not some big environmentalist. I'm just going like, oh, wow, I was unaware, but I've done a deep dive in the last 6 months. And I'm looking at this going like, okay, wait a minute. I remembered you talking about the Lord being angry. And it's like, why is he angry? Because this is harming us in a massive way. I'm sitting there, I had the biggest problem going like, I'm not going gluten-free. I like bread. I like all this stuff. Stop with all the organics. I need to know what's in the pantry that I recognize.
Right.
I struggle like, why is gluten so bad? It's like, if it's bread and it's grains and it's wheat, I'm sorry, God made those. That's in the Bible. And so I'm having my little theological argument with my organic wife. And what I didn't learn is our wheat nature has been changed by all of this chemical stuff. They've changed the nature of our gluten, genetically modified to make it fluffier, nicer, and all the things that they love to market. But it's actually causing a horrible response inside of us because it's kind of ruining our gut lining.
Yeah.
And it's allowing things that normally are in a closed system to just process, like the body's designed. Now all of a sudden we don't have tight junctions at a cellular level, and things can get through into parts of the body they never should have. And the body's response is foreign substance will attack it. And it's like we get all kinds of cancers, all kinds of stressed out organs and immune diseases because of this. And I'm thinking, okay, tight junctions. Give me the spiritual application, because I'm not a medical doctor, Lord. And I'm looking at the body going, if the body doesn't have tight junctions, we don't seem to be able to respond spiritually to the things around us well, as far as healing others, as far as God's presence. It's like when at the church at the cellular level, where 2 or 3 are gathered together, there I am in their midst. What's so amazing about that verse is that gathered together is actually a double reflex of the same word used twice. It's gathered, together. And when we're like that, God's presence is there in our midst. And I'm going like, because when I go to Starbucks and I get a coffee and the barista's a Christian, we don't have the presence of God, but there's 2 of us gathered together. But there's no intimate joining of relationship, and so you're not experiencing the fullness of life, the koinonia that you've been talking about as so vital and for us fostering. And so I'm looking at all of this in nature, and I'm recognizing we have these spiritual conditions in the church and in the body and the way we gather with these issues in ourselves, individuals, and that's what got my attention to go like, wait a minute. If this affects, like plastics in our ocean water, those don't break down. Those become impurities that end up, like, probably if we tested us, we're probably 2% plastic.
Let me tell you what the tests say. Because, I read just an article yesterday, they're thinking the plastic pollution in the ocean, that we know there are plastic islands out there bigger than Texas. in the ocean. And of course, the wildlife is swallowing it. They can't process it. They're dying, washing up on our beaches. They start testing human beings. They found out not only does every human being have plastic in them, they found plastic particles in every cell of every body they tested, right down to the cellular level. And this got my attention a few years ago when I had that experience and I saw the anger of the Lord over the plastic pollution. And you know, he so loved the world that he gave his son. You know, he loves us too. And of course it's, you know, he loves us more than the sparrows, he said, but he loves the whole world. Yeah. The whole world cannot breathe because of the plastic pollution. It's clogging up everything. At the same time, and like the coronavirus and many other things, I think we've got our eye off the ball of what maybe the problem really is and how to fix it, what we've got to do. But I think your whole discourse, these are things we need to dig down on. I think you're on one of those God trails. You got to keep searching this out. You got to keep digging down. You're on to something here.
It's been fascinating because there is political agendas going on here that are just absolutely not helpful. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that that's the only issue. It's like I can be distracted, getting all messed up in that fight, and I'm going like, that's a fight we have to have. But the real issue is justice. Mm-hmm. Is justice being done? You know, like when we want social justice, it's like justice does not need a modifier in front of it. When we put social justice in front, it's like we want to pick the winners and losers. We want to pick the issues. Mm-hmm. We want to set that. And it's like, no, we need to do justice. I got two books that I've been diving into, and one is a book on communion as far as just the blood. Mm-hmm. And I'm going like, gosh, everyone's got funky ideas of what communion's about, but it is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do in remembrance of what he's done. And I think in terms of even the revelation of what the cross is about, for far too long, we've talked about the cross in terms of a judicial sort of way about, you know, he dealt with the penalty of sin. And I'm saying, like, I think the cross was actually medicinal. You know, when Jesus spoke of the cross, he said, just as the Son of Man must be lifted up, just as the serpent in the wilderness was lifted up. Well, what happened back then? You got a bunch of vipers, being loosed in Numbers 20. They're biting everyone. They're poison. God instructs Moses to lift up a standard and to put a bronze serpent on it. That's the exact picture of medicine on every doctor's
right. It's got
kind
Moses'
of coat.
Staff. Yeah,
that's the ancient picture for medicine. When Jesus was saying, that's what I got to do, it's like he was the only sinless person on the earth in whom the disease could come, and he was able to produce a cure of antibodies. In his death, somehow the Father and him took into the host the disease and conquered it. So like if you were to get bitten by a snake, and how do you produce antivenom? Well, you have to find a host in which that venom can be introduced, to which it doesn't have an effect. Mm-hmm. That's like this coronavirus. To healthy people, it doesn't have any much of effect. We do need the cure and the antibodies, and I'm going like, I think the cross, if it's really understood, Jesus is our antidote to sin. He has produced something that he wants to release his life in us. You know, a lack of oxygen in the blood, its blood's there, but it's not delivering the life. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking we need a deeper revelation of what's really happening on the cross. I mean, Paul wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. He's wanting to know one thing and one thing only. I want to know Jesus Christ and him crucified. Mm-hmm. And I just sort of feel like I don't know that we have mined the depths and been able to proclaim the gospel in a way that really is the profound agent of healing. We have an epidemic of chronic release because of what's happening in our earth and our soils and all the stuff around us. And what we need is a gospel that really does heal. And I'm just dead and in pursuit, going like, God, it is time for the healing revivals of old to be unleashed because we have need of it. We're not solving this. I don't think it'll be found in a beaker.
Well, one of the things, talking about, it's happening in our country, the I can't breathe, it's happening in our creation, in nature. It looks like all the pollutants, all the plastic and everything else, the earth can't breathe anymore. Everything's happening. And I think what this is pointing back to, who is the breath in the scripture? It's
the Holy Spirit. Hello.
Yeah. And, but there's also there's a sense of the whole creation is groaning and travailing. Man is, our culture, our country is, our civilization, the earth, the beasts, the animals are suffering terribly because of all this. We're at the point, and in some sense, everything that's going on is all tied together, and it's all crying out, I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
And in Romans, what are they crying out for? The unveiling of the sons of God.
Yeah.
I was out mowing the lawn a few months back, and this was before we had, it was before Passover came. And I remember you sent me this little link where it's like, this is the first time in all of recorded history since the first one where the entire earth is experiencing the Passover. And when I was out mowing the lawn, I felt like the Lord said...
Well, they were doing that because they were... On Passover, they all had to stay in their home.
Yeah.
They were supposed to all the Jewish people, you could not leave your house. And now all of a sudden, like the whole world is shut down. But it's the first time since then that all of Israel was shut in as well.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, that's huge. I can't look past that. That is huge. Mm-hmm. What are you saying, God? And when I was mowing the lawn, I heard this little phrase, the chrysalis is coming. And I knew what that was about because it's like I was involved in this thing called Little Butterfly Circus. And it's like the whole process of transformation. How does this little caterpillar ultimately become this glorious butterfly? It has to crawl up into a time of cocooning where it dies to its old nature and is somehow transformed into an entirely different, totally different creature.
Yeah.
And I really just sort of felt like this whole period of time, I have resisted getting busy again. I got people banging on my door needing stuff. And I'm just like, I'm sorry. I'm not going to waste this moment in my own life to finally get still and to kind of go like, Lord, you have my undivided attention. Help me. I don't think that transformation is passive. The caterpillar spins its own cocoon, and then it is inside, and something miraculous takes place, but I don't think it's passive. I haven't had a chance to actually speak with the butterfly in a known language and understand it.
No, but there are studies about it. You know when its greatest struggle is breaking out of the cocoon.
Emerging out of its time of cocoon.
It's got to fight the fight of its life to get out of that cocoon. But they said if it did not have that fight, it would not get strong enough to flap those huge wings. Yeah. So in order to fly, before the caterpillar is conformed to the earth, to the contours of the earth, now it can soar above the earth. And I'm sorry, but we've got to... We're going to have to close on that note. We got to go to a new level. But listen, Brad, I really appreciate this journey you're on. This I think a path that God has you on to understanding. Let's do this again. Let's dig down some more on this.
Yeah.
I think you're tying many things together that really do. All of it's screaming at us.
Yeah.
And all of it is the whole creation starting to scream. Thank you so much for taking this time and sharing this with us. And this is Brad Cummings, and you're going to be seeing and hearing from him again. And I'll talk again about this Founder's Bible, that to me, one of the great resources that will help you breathe again.
Yes,
that will
absolutely.
help you get some spiritual oxygen into you. So appreciate that work that you and David Barton did with that Bible. Well, anyway, thank you so much,
Awesome.
Brad. We'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Okay.
God
Thanks,
bless
Rick.
you, man.
On TV, online, on the go, and on your iPad. Tune into Prophetic Perspectives with Rick Joyner, always available on MorningstarTV.com.